Hello and welcome to Unstoppable Unbreakable, where each week we'll hear from United Hills charter coaches, special guests about honing our talent with hard work and how that makes us unstoppable and how building resilience makes us unbreakable.
So, hey, GHC, this is Coach Barenson, assistant head football coach. I'm in my 23rd year of coaching and my second here at GHC. I'm here with Coach Nick Garcia, the strength coach, rose coach at Notre Dame High School. Coach Garcia is a nationally recognized strength coach and was named United States West Region Strength Coach of the Year 2019. I was fortunate to coach with him for the past 6 years prior to arriving at GHC. So, Coach Garcia, you know, in this era of such uncertainty and everything seems to be on Zoom life now, and really checking in with our players' social, emotional, and mental health, what can you do to support a player's mental health and social, emotional health, either during this time or just on a regular basis when you're at practice?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do, and I learned this from Coach Bucky's coach, listening to him speak, was you ask them specific questions that don't have anything to do with the sport you're playing. So, for example, we just started our Zoom meetings for Notre Dame for our physical education classes. And so when I was getting to know them, we went through each person and say, okay, where do you live? What's the greatest accomplishment you've ever had? What's the biggest disappointment you've ever had? What's your mom and dad do? Things like that. So you get to know them in a different way than just how good of an athlete they are. And I think they appreciate that. Furthermore, before we start class, we'll talk about, kind of what they did over the weekend, what, TV shows they're watching, what movies they're watching, if they're doing anything interesting, if some kid likes to go fishing or whatnot, they'll tell us about that. Just so that they understand that you care more about them as a person than just as an athlete. During the school year, when things are normal, hopefully they get back to normal at some point. What we'll do as coaches, or what I'll do as a coach, is during lunch or nutrition time, I'll go around to each table during the break, and I'll ask them what's going on. I might make fun of them in a fun way, about something, that makes them laugh. Ask them, did you guys watch the UFC fight, or did you guys do this? Did you guys do that? And if it's a specific table that I know that they're interested in, like, for example, if one table is really interested in the UFC, then we'll talk about that. If they're interested in some other TV show, then we'll talk about that. And I don't do that just for the male athletes too. I do that with the female athletes as well, the female volleyball players and whatnot. And luckily my wife, she'll watch different things that reality TV that the younger girls may watch as well. And so I'll ask them if they saw the Shaws of Sunset or something like that. And they appreciate that.
Absolutely. So, we've been discussing, helping athletes advocate for themselves and to be able to ask questions, especially when player confidence may be lacking due to their ability to perform or ability to ask a question of their coaches or teammates. And one of the things that we want to hit on is self-efficacy and the belief in one's ability to succeed in achieving a specific outcome or reaching a specific goal. Students with high level of self-efficacy participate more in class, work harder, persist longer, and have fewer adverse social emotional reactions when encountering difficulties than students with lower self-efficacy. So let me ask you, how do you ask your players to advocate for themselves when they receive little or no support, maybe from teammates or coaches?
Well, I think number one is instead of expecting them to tell you how they feel about things and whatnot, you ask them, how did that feel? How did that throw feel? How did that shot feel? Maybe whether it's golf or basketball. How did that set feel if you're like a volleyball player? You ask them first, and then maybe have individual meetings with them and tell them it's okay if you want to set up an individual meeting with me and talk to me about what your you're lacking in confidence for. And maybe they need to understand. Once they understand something better and have more experience with things, they feel more comfortable asking questions. So, for example, when I was a young coach, I'd go to these big coaching clinics, and there'd be big time coaches there. And I wasn't quite confident in what my question was going to be or what the reaction to the question would be. I wouldn't necessarily ask the question, or I would wait and I would ask the question in private or by email or by a private conversation. As they get more confident, understand the game more, or understand their sport more, whatever they're playing, I think that they'll develop that confidence and understand they know what they're talking about, they know what they're asking. And so it'll be easier for them to have self-efficacy and be able to ask questions and be able to be confident in front of their teammates. But until then, I think it's up to the coach to go ahead and make sure they do a good job teaching the athlete and making sure that they tell all the athletes and coach up all the athletes, and the fact that not everybody knows everything at this level, and that as they get more experience, they will begin to know more things at this level and become more confident asking questions and become more confident in the game.
That sounds like goes hand in hand with building relationships from the ground up, and we start coaching our athletes to make sure that they know that they have that comfort level and they are able to, as you said, either hang back and ask that question after practice, or feel free to reach out maybe via email or come into the coach's office at another time, but making sure that they are able to ask those questions.
And out of that is like, for example, let's take football, for example. We have position groups, right? So you have your quarterback group, you have your running back group, and then you may have a linebacker group, defensive back group. Well, for example, let's take the defense and say, okay, we have our linebacker group, our defensive back group, and our lineman group, okay? And they may all meet separately, and they can develop confidence in their small little close groups, the more intimate groups. And then, okay, well, maybe now that they're developing confidence from just asking the coach first, then developing confidence in asking questions and understanding their personal position, their linebacker group or their defensive line group next. And then, okay, they'll become more confident in asking questions in the big group, the defensive group meeting by themselves. And then there's a whole team meeting, and it's just kind of a progression like anything else, like we do coaching linemen or coaching whatever else we're coaching.
So, Coach, you and I played in a different era. We played high school football in a whole different era where asking why wasn't really was frowned upon. You didn't ask your coach why. You just coach said and you did. And when I flipped and started coaching in '98, I had a player ask me why, and not in a disrespectful way, just why do we do this? And it's really changed. So how can you help support, or what would you tell coaches who offer little feedback to their athletes? And how can you help them communicate their message to athletes?
Well, the first thing I do, when I was in college, my coach, I had 100% confidence in him. Whatever he said, we did, and regardless. And but he also taught me, him being my coach, and he was a very young coach when he was coaching me, was that if you decide to coach at a high level, especially with kids, let's say stereotypically like a Princeton or a Stanford or some place where it has a high academic accolade, where everybody thinks everybody's smart there, that you better know what you're talking about, because if not, they're going to catch you on your nonsense. So since I started coaching, I always explain to each one of my athletes in every sport why we're doing what we're doing. For example, baseball, everybody likes to bench press. Well, why don't we do normal bench and baseball? And I explained to them why it's more important to do dumbbell bench in baseball than it is regular bench in baseball, for shoulder mobility. For throwers, this is why we're doing this specific technique. This is why we're teaching it this way and whatnot. For football, you coach in defensive line or being the defensive coordinator. This is why we're running this defense against this offense. And it'll give them more confidence and understanding in what they're doing. So even before there's going to be a why, I always tell them the why before we start. And I think that's the best way to go ahead and counter that. And so in the future, it's a little more efficient. And, you have those kids who want to ask those questions. Well, you're going to counter it right away, whether it's in a meeting or whether you're teaching it on a field walkthrough or whatnot. So my biggest advice would be to counter it by telling them why we're doing what we're doing right away, rather than waiting. And don't just say, do it because I said to do it. Do it because this is the reason why.
So kind of like being in a classroom, right? You set the objective on the board or on your presentation or whatever it is you're doing with your class, but you have the objective up while they walk in the door, so they know exactly what and why they're doing. So that's a great answer. And I know we definitely do that when we're teaching, and we are on a large stage when we're coaching, either in the ring, in the weight room, on the field. So it's, Coach, the commonality that I'm hearing from you, and we've been fortunate enough to coach together for a long time. And I've been fortunate enough to have you help my kids with throws and teach me how to be a throws coach, which is not my forte. And I did mention in our intro that you are married to our wonderful athletic director, Ms. Garcia. That's critical. But what I'm hearing as we wrap this up is all about building relationships. When we're talking about social emotional health or checking in, self-efficacy, everything that you kind of talked about is kind of what we're trying to do in the football program here at GHC as well, is really building relationships before we start to build athletes, before we start to put in a system, right? Getting to know our guys, getting to know who we're working with, what makes them tick, how we can motivate each of our kids, because motivation is a big part. And really what I'm hearing from you is just the check-in, right? The check-in and building those relationships is such a big part of coaching. Coach, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, to add what you just said, and those building the relationships, that can always be around. They're not always going to be athletes, and you may not always be a coach. So let's take, Jordan Palmer yesterday, Big Baby Palmer. When we saw him get injured, I texted him right away, and he texted me back right away. Or when Daniel Munyer yesterday, made the team for the Titans in the league. So we texted back and forth right away. So, and even then, Kylan Wilborn, all these athletes that I've coached in the past, we keep in touch with. And even some that aren't athletes anymore. I'll take, Sam DeMartinez, for example. He was a great shot putter, a great football player at Cal. And, we're still keep in touch. And there's people all over the country. Koa Farmer, for example, he's no longer an athlete, played for Penn State. We had a great conversation on the phone a week ago. So those relationships will last forever. And, they're only athletes for part of the time. So, and you may only be coaching for part of the time. So that's the most important thing.
Absolutely. All right, GHC. So that's Coach Garcia from Notre Dame High School. Once again, I am Coach Barenson with the GHC football. Thanks for tuning in.
One of the questions we were talking about was, how can we help a player who has not had success in previous performances? And so I have a very simple way of doing it. What we'll do is we'll wait for them to have a successful practice. So obviously they're having a successful day, they have confidence. So you put them in a competition situation, and right there, it's their cue that, okay, this is a competitive atmosphere. It's time to get after it.